All right, so we passed the hour. I think it's a good time to start. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Pablo Endres, Managing Director from 7Shift and part of the CRACoWi consortium. The CRACoWi is an EU project or project funded by the European Union. We have a consortium of, I think, approximately 12 different partners that are working in this. And today we have Michael Beine here. That's going to be going on with our series of our CRACademy web series. Michael, can you please show me the next slide? Yes, so this is part of our CRACademy webinar series, From Understanding the CRA to the Practical Compliance. If you missed session number 1, which happened in February, you can find this on the CRACoWi website, right? The recording is available there. The recording of this session will also be available there if you want to come back and look at it. If you, you think you missed something, or if you want to share it with anyone who could not be here live today, again, this will be available on our YouTube channel and on our website, marked as part of the CRACademy. We have a third session in this series, right? Which will be happening in a couple of weeks, 3 weeks from now, just after Easter, which will be covering the third part is conformity assessment, CE marking, and the vulnerability management under the CRA. Right, information is on the screen. The QR code will take you directly to the registration page. I will also paste it in the chat for anything. About the logistics, yeah, the way the webinar works is that mics are all off, cameras are all off except for our presenters. If you have any questions, if you need to, don't understand something, please feel free to type it in the chat. I will keep my my eye on it and raise some issues with Michael where needed, and we can use that also for interactions. And with that, I will give the floor to Michael Beine.
Yes, hello everybody. Brief introduction about myself. My name is Michael Beine. I'm the business unit manager about cybersecurity at Bureau Veritas in Germany. I have a history in the TIC industry, testing, inspection, certification for several decades already. And since several years, I'm focusing on cybersecurity topic in the intersection of testing, inspection, and certification, and cybersecurity is a very interesting topic right now as increasing regulation takes place. Last year, we had the activation of the cybersecurity aspects in Radio Equipment Directive. Next year, we will have the activation of the Cyber Resilience Act. This creates a lot of activity in the industry. And we as Bureau Veritas try to help the industry to prepare for these regulations and to comply with these regulations. We like to be your companion on the compliance journey and help you through the roadmap to achieve full compliance to your products. Today, as Pablo mentioned, I'm going to present 3 topics. The status of the standardization, quite a moving target. Then we will talk about cybersecurity risk analysis, a key and core element of the Cyber Resilience Act, how this can be done, and what are the expectations of the Cyber Resilience Act about this activity. And finally, I will also look into the technical requirements as they are defined by the Cyber Resilience Act. Okay, let's have a look at the standardization first. So the Cyber Resilience Act triggered a whole portfolio of standards and standardization. First of all, horizontal standards have been designed or will be designed and defined, which are process related, as processes apply to all kind of products in a probably very similar way, and they focus on the generic product security controls. I will go into details further on the horizontal standards. Then there is vertical standards for each, for several types of products. So the Cyber Resilience Act specifies important Class 1 and Class 2 products and critical products. And for each of these product types, there will be a vertical standard focusing really on that type of product. Examples of those products I put here on this overview slide. For example, it could be a software-only product like a password manager, but it could also be a technical product like a network interface or a router or a modem. Or it could be smart home, smart door lock, for example, or even more security related, a firewall or a secure element like a SIM card or a secure storage, more memory storage, or a root of trust in hardware. So these verticals will all get their own vertical standards. And then there are common specifications, which are recognized frameworks from the industry, which have been already established and already in place before the Cyber Resilience Act came around. And prominent examples are the IEC 62443 for operational technology, the EN 303645 for consumer IoT, and there's initiatives like the BSI TR 03183, helping industry to understand and prepare for CRA compliance with a focus on the Cyber Resilience Act and translating the legal language into standard language. Looking at the horizontal standards, already 5 items or 5 parts of these standards have been prepared. -1 is about vocabulary. So it gives the basis how to talk about cybersecurity in the context of Cyber Resilience Act standardization. Then we have the -1-2 principles for cyber resilience. These are really core process related requirements, how manufacturers can act or need to act to create the necessary cyber resilience in their organization in relation to products, digital products. And then we have the vulnerability handling, a separated part, because that is activated already with the requirement of reporting obligation in September this year. These standards have a delivery date, or expected release date in August this year. End of August this year, we can expect that these standards will be published as European norm, as European standard. Then the PR suffix that you see in the front will be removed, and they are expected to be released at that time. Standardization is moving quite quickly forward in light speed for standardization. A lot of effort is put into it. The inquiry phase has already been completed for these first 3 items. A lot of feedback has been received. Standardization at Sensenelec working group JTC 13 work group 9 are urgently working on incorporating these feedback to make it really a commonly accepted agreeable standard that everybody can agree on, or at least a majority vote can agree on, so that they can be released as European standards. The next 2 items, the -1-4 and the 1-5, are related to product specific requirements or product functionality. The 1-4 is the continued development based on the EN 18031, which has been developed for the Radio Equipment Directive. So those of you who have radio equipment as products will know this standard. The further development into the Cyber Resilience Act is going on in this work group, and the result will be the EN 40000-1-4. It will have a generic product security controls. As I said, this is horizontal standards for all type of products. This generic nature is difficult for standardization. Standards cannot be as precise if they need to cover all type of products. There's many questions of how much of the 18031 will be taken over. The latest information that I heard from those working groups is that 60% of the 18031 will be still visible in the -1-4. 40% will be different or new. That is very clear, as the Radio Equipment Directive has a strict focus on radio equipment and the risks for this type of equipment. The Cyber Resilience Act looks at a broader risk portfolio, and addressing these risks with countermeasures and their security controls will also have increased coverage. So this standard will be broader than the 18031 was or is. And another very interesting standard is the 40,000-1-5. It is describing threats and security objectives. This can be very interesting input to the threat and risk analysis that manufacturers are mandated to do for all their products by 27. And this is the risk analysis is fundamental activity. And this is a very interesting information into this risk analysis. But we will see this in the second session in further detail, where this threat lists and security objectives can be helpful. The -1-4 and the 1-5 standard will be released later. The due date from the standardization request is end of October 27. So this is very close to the deadline in mid of December for the full compliance. So it's a little bit tricky to wait for the standard, for this particular standard, for the compliance. Then it will be only a very short time period to accommodate. So I think a strategy in picking the right standard for the product is a critical item. Needs several considerations. These deadlines still are very, very important to look into. This is about the horizontal standard. Let's have a look at the vertical standards. So as I said, vertical standards go along with the product types as specified in important class 1, important class 2, and critical by the Cyber Resilience Act. This is a selection. Still, it's not everything. This is a selection where I already had the number, the identifier of the standard. These standards that you see here is not the complete picture. There is more coming. These are the ones that have a number, and those are developed and established by ETSI, working group in TC Cyber working group. And ETSI has a different way of publishing standards. They are more public here and make draft available. Already early drafts are available. I will show where and how later on. The release date for these vertical standards are already this year. Again, end of October this year, it's the deadline for these vertical standards to be used. This is important because products falling under these categories need to follow these standards. And that's why they need to be available early in time so that industry has enough time to prepare their compliance with these standards. So if your product falls into one of those classifications, it's important to look at the standards. And that is also very beneficial that the draft standards are already visible. This is a good guidance and a good way to prepare for it. If your product falls into the default category, then common specifications can be a choice, can be a way to go to. The IEC 62443 is probably the golden standard for operational technology. Also, the standardization in IEC is progressing, and there are currently amendments and adaptations into a EN IEC 62443 version. So this EN, this initiative to make it a European norm and adapt at least the parts 4-1, 4-2, 3-3, and so on for the Cyber Resilience Act is ongoing activity. Already based on the mappings that ENISA did a few, or I think 2 years ago, and also the BSI TR 13183 has a mapping between the 62443 and the CRA, reveals that there is a strong overlap of this standard with the expectations of the Cyber Resilience Act. Also, these mappings give a good basis as an argumentation why this is a good choice to use. If your product is a consumer IoT device, it's in that space, then 62443 might not be the best choice. It might be too complex, as consumer IoT products mainly are more focused, more simple in the use, and especially in the interconnection with other devices. So then, in this environment for consumer IoT devices, the EN 303645 is a very good choice of standards to follow. It's available now. It's already been updated one time in last year to accommodate new developments and understandings and the learnings from applying the standards. And another very important aspect of this standard is the reuse in other scenarios or in other areas. So, for example, in other countries outside of the EU, this standard can be used as basis for their local requirements. Let's say in UK, there is a UK PSTI requirement that takes 3 items out of that 303645 standard on top of the UK CA and CE marking. So this can be a good way to go to. The same requirements also apply in Australia, who have adopted a similar scheme for consumer IoT devices to bring into their market. In Singapore and in Japan, labeling schemes are published and are provided also based on this standard. So in that international scheme, the reuse of that standard is a very interesting aspect. Also, the mappings again show that this standard has a very good overlap and a coverage of the Cyber Resilience Act. And then looking a little bit into the BSI TR 03181, this is designed and provided by the German BSI as designated market surveillance authority. This standard has a good relevance. It's a strong reference to look into it because it's a surveillance authority providing such a guidance and standard. This can be very helpful. It is split in 3 parts. Again, general resilience process requirements. Then part 2 about the SBOM, a very important topic to cover and adopt in the Cyber Resilience Act. And then part 3 about vulnerability handling. So these are choices of standards that manufacturers can go through. And I hope to explain a little bit the pros and cons, what could be good arguments to use the one or the other standard to show compliance to the Cyber Resilience Act. A few more details about the 62443 parts. So the blue highlighted parts are adapted and may become a EN 303. It's a EN 62443. These are the ones that are most relevant to cover the Cyber Resilience Act. There's also discussions about making the 62443 a harmonized standard with presumption of conformity. So that is quite a tricky term. I try to explain a little bit about it. Presumption of conformity is the connection between the legal requirements in the law, Cyber Resilience Act, and the technical requirements in this technical standard, 62443. And by citing a standard with the presumption of conformity, the EU Commission, who does this citing, raises the level of the standard to allow manufacturers to easily use this to show compliance to the regulation. So this is a connecting point, and there's a debate about this standard. At the moment, it looks like strong arguments from the EU Commission not to expect presumption of conformity for 62443. But I think the last word is not spoken. There is now a lot of lobbying going on to maybe still achieve presumption of conformity for this standard. That will be a strong achievement for the standard and a strong point to use it for the Cyber Resilience Act. Besides the technical aspect of a good a good coverage and overlap. Then looking at the publications of early drafts, here ETSI provides, as I said, the early draft versions of a lot of standards that they are developing. Here, this is also quite fastly evolving. This view is from end of last year. If you look now into this, the list is getting longer. You will also see that the increasing version numbers is going on. So this is moving really fast and really quick. And as soon as your products fall into this category, this is a place to go to understand what the technical requirements for your product might be. To again show the width and broadness of this, the work program for the Cyber Resilience Act spans 41 standards. So that's a lot of work for the standardization and a lot of standards for the industry to look into. So many standards are currently being drafted and written and constantly being updated. This is the view into the current status of the standardization. Pablo, do we have already some questions that we want to take right now? Otherwise, I would move on to the next chapter.
Oh, great. I was about to say the same. So we have a question regarding unmanaged switches. The question is, will these should these be part of the router, modems, and switches vertical standard, or do you have any idea of where else they would be anchored on?
Yes. So the standardization slides are not really fit for determining the classification. But you see here that there is this class, router modem switches, and it does, in my understanding, high level, does not differentiate between managed or unmanaged switch. So first assumption would be a switch falls into this category. But a more detailed view is definitely necessary to determine if this is really the case. So if this is an interesting question, we can connect later on, maybe in direct messaging and look into this.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, if that was the question, then I will move on with the next. Exactly, very good. Then I will move on with the next chapter, looking into the cybersecurity risk assessment. So the cybersecurity risk assessment is the predominant important activity that manufacturers must do. It's a mandatory activity. There's no way to avoid this. It needs to be done. And here I'm going to explain what that means to do a cybersecurity risk assessment. A typical of workflow, let's say, or way through it is depicted on the left side with those 5 steps or phases. First of all, the security context need to be established or defined for the product. It's important to look at risk always in a contextual framework. Risk always plays out in the context. It depends on where a product is, where and how a product is used to determine the necessary risk level. So the intended use, the intended environment of use, these are the elements that need to be defined and described. The better you can describe it, the more precisely you can look at the risks for this environment. The next thing which creates the risk is the data flows and assets. So typically you will look at a high-level architecture, device, cloud, smartphone app that an IoT use case would have. In embedded device, industrial devices, it might be a little bit different, but the high-level architecture, the data flows, which data flows from where to where, and what are the assets, the data stores, and the secrets that are put into these elements. This is an important view to take and to establish, to describe, because it allows to identify also where protection is needed. If there is a secret that needs to be protected, where there is a communication flow of critical information or confidential information that needs to be protected, because also the attacker will take a similar way. They will look at this and see where they can break in. So that is the next step. Also, as a defender, look at the attack scenarios. So what are potential ways that attackers could take to break into these data flows and steal assets and do some harm? This also goes along with an attacker model. Not all attackers are the same. There is a range of attack strengths, let's say, that we see from script kiddies who can do some very simple things just because it's so easy. And with a low motivation, they will try. If it doesn't work, they will go somewhere else. Then there is some more motivated cyber criminals who want to steal something, but they want to get quickly some typically monetary benefits. But there might be similar attack motivation also for sabotage, to destroy something or damage something without the, let's say, monetary benefit. And then the high-level attacker model will be a nation state or intelligence having a lot of effort, who can put a lot of effort and typically do some very targeted attacks on a certain thing. Like we see in modern warfare and cyber warfare, where this is strongly connected. If your device is exposed to such a risk, then you need to take a lot more effort to protect against these kind of risks. That brings us to the risk matrix. That is something that is a core element of each security assessment, and it allows to calculate and rationalize the risk level. And typically it goes by impact times likelihood. It's not a mathematical multiplication. Also, if you look on the right side, you will see the numbers. They are actually increasing like this, right? So if you go up, you will always see a higher number. If you go with the diagonal, you will also see increasing numbers. Same here. So this is how these levels are made. 5-level scales in probability and impact are quite a common way to do it. You can use more, you can use the less. 3x3 is the minimum that makes sense. 5x5 has a quite good level of detail, still be manageable. And important activity in the risk matrix or risk establishment is calibrating the scales. That means you need to look at and define what that means for you and your context and your understanding as a manufacturer about what is almost certain. How many times is it happening per week, per year, per month, whatever. How likely is something? What means unlikely? What is and then for calibrating these scales, it's a very good exercise to do examples. If you have a very nice example, what is unlikely event, then you can always measure the other things towards this example and put that into this scales. Same is about the impact. It's always interesting to start with a catastrophic event and see, okay, what would be the worst that I could ever imagine that could ever happen? What is that catastrophic event? And if you know what is a catastrophic event in your context, then you can see, okay, how can an attacker achieve this catastrophic event? And then you start, this thing will play out. You will understand, okay, if that is the catastrophic event, this is a attack path that leads to this, maybe we can use this and that mitigations to prevent this catastrophic event from happening. Because that is essentially what you need to do with the mitigations. You need to define mitigations to put into your product, so to reduce the potential risk under an acceptable residual risk level. That is the whole idea about this, and that helps to do mitigations at the right scale or right level. Because cybersecurity always is a level approach. You can never have 100% security. Nobody will be able to pay for this or will accept this. So it's always a level decision that needs to be taken, and this matrix can help to make this on a rational level. Another good activity after doing this exercise with the table is to lean back and look at it with the common sense. Because sometimes the rating may create some edge cases or strange things. We say, well, this is nice calculation, but makes no sense. If it does not make sense, then you need to adapt the rating to help make it sense. So this is an important activity in the risk matrix to make sense. And then if you have identified the mitigations that you need to put into place in your product, it's an important step for the risk analysis under the Cyber Resilience Act to map those mitigations towards the Annex 1 in the Cyber Resilience Act. That is important for the compliance story or journey later on. So the risk analysis is a key element to find out what you need to do to protect your product. The standards, the horizontal standards for sure, will not help you with that question. The vertical standards may help you with this question because they are already defined for a certain product category, and then the risk assumptions may be the same for all those products. But if you have a default product and you want to apply a horizontal standard, only the cyber risk assessment will tell you which mitigations need to be in place and which can be left out. And mapping that to the Cyber Resilience Act is important to then show how you comply to the expectation of the Cyber Resilience Act. The expectation of the Cyber Resilience Act towards the cyber risk assessment are defined in Article 2, Chapter 13, which the whole Chapter 13 is a very valuable chapter. It talks about obligations of the manufacturer, and then there are 3 paragraphs defining the cyber risk assessment. So first of all, cyber risk assessment needs to be documented and updated as appropriate during the support period of the product. And then what does it need to include? The cyber risk assessment shall comprise at least an analysis of cybersecurity risks. So it's not a compliance risk or it's not a business risk. It is a cybersecurity risk with the focus of the user. So the user of the product has certain risks when he is using it. These risks, and they come from the cybersecurity space, they need to be taken into account. And then It is based on the intended purpose, reasonable, foreseeable use. That's what I put with the context or the condition of use. So the context is an important thing. Assets, data flow, assets, and so on is important. And also the lifetime of the product is a relevant item to take into account. So this risk analysis should not only look at the young age of the product, but also into the aging product and into the taking it out of use. And here, this is where it is asking that the security requirements of the Annex 1 are mapped, and the risk assessment defines where these items are applicable and how they apply and how they are implemented. So this is the what and how questions that the risk analysis or risk assessment needs to produce. And then what shall be done with this documented risk analysis or risk assessment? It needs to be put into the technical documentation. So technical documentation is a term in the Cyber Resilience Act, which means a bunch of documents that need to be put together and need to be held available by the manufacturer, especially for requests from the authority, market surveillance authority, and also if a notified body needs to do a type examination certification, also the notified body will look at this technical documentation. So this means the cyber risk assessment needs to be provided to these entities, not necessarily in full to deliver to the public and not in full to the customers. Typically, risk assessments are critical information, because if an attacker reads this, he gets the instruction where it's where is the weakest point. So this risk assessment should not be published publicly and leaked to attackers, but need to be provided to these authorities. And then last but not least, in paragraph 7, it talks about updating. So this risk assessment needs to be updated periodically and when relevant changes have been done. So always then the risk analysis may need an update. So I put the Cyber Resilience Act fortune cookie here. I call this a great freedom for manufacturers to define the necessary measures in place into their product, but it also comes with a great responsibility to take over the responsibility for those design decisions. So this is a key element here of the Cyber Resilience Act. And then looking at also at the standards, we see the EN 40000-1-2 also describes how a risk management and how a risk assessment looks like. Here it's very similar to the workflow that I shown. It's about looking at the product context. The risk acceptance criteria needs to be defined. The risk matrix needs to be established. The treatment or mitigations need to be defined. The residual risks is calculated based on the treatment and compared to the acceptable risk. And then the risks need to be managed and updated. So this can be an interesting additional guidance how to do a risk analysis in the light of the Cyber Resilience Act. And further tools and frameworks available can be the STRIDE methodology, very commonly used in threat modeling and based on data flow diagrams, asset identification, and looking at threat and actors from different perspectives. And that is what the STRIDE acronym stands for. It's about spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege, risk categories, let's say, or risk aspects. that are taken into account by this STRIDE methodology. Another option can be a MITRE attack and MITRE embed, depending on the type of device. It has an interactive threat catalog and then maps a lot of common mitigations towards these threats. So this can be an interesting approach. And recently we discovered this Cuba Libre initiative, which is open source, hosted on GitHub, and is a questionnaire-based open source Excel tool for Cyber Resilience Act. So it's definitely designed for the Cyber Resilience Act. And the big benefit is that it maps the mitigations towards the Cyber Resilience Act Annex 1. And it's a questionnaire-based activity, so it guides and helps manufacturers to do this. It's developed by Fraunhofer and the SIG AG. So that can be an interesting approach. So far about the risk assessment. Pablo, do we have questions about risk assessment?
There was one question about a risk assessment. The question is, are there examples for calibration scales available to use as a template?
Yes, they are available. For example, the Cuba Libre has such a template. From my perspective, it makes a lot of sense to use your own calibration. That is why we call it calibration. And it's not external calibration like you would calibrate a thermometer or measurement equipment. It should be calibrated to your own security context and to your own understanding. That's why we call it calibrating the scales. It's not externally, but should contextualize those scales towards your environment.
Right, great. We have no additional questions here. I do want to just remind you that there is one of the CRACoWi episodes that does lots of the risk, the threat modeling, right? We have I think it's a 2-series threat modeling that's also available in part of the CRACoWi. If you want to see some examples and see how hands-on how this is going, you can refer back to that chapter in our CRACademy.
Yes, very good. Then I will dive into the technical requirements. So, in order to understand this question or get closer to the question, what do we have to do for Cyber Resilience Act? I hear this question many times. The Annex 1 of the Cyber Resilience Act is a good place to go to. And I want to explain a little bit what is the content or the elements here. First of all, it is split in 2 parts. Part 1 talks about one, secure development lifecycle, and the risk-based approach. The risk-based approach is what I explain also in that risk assessment unit. And then part 1, item 2, talks about technical product properties. And there's A to M, different product properties. We will go to this during the slides. And then there is part 2 of the Annex 1, item 1 to 8, about the vulnerability handling requirements. So this is to give you a high-level view of what is the Cyber Resilience Act Annex 1 and how it's structured. Now let's have a look at the legal language itself and see what it has. Part 1, item 1 is quite brief. It says product with digital elements shall be designed, developed, and produced in such a way that they ensure an appropriate level of cybersecurity based on the risk. So that is not a lot of language. It is just about establishing the risk-based approach and taking the whole design, development, and production phase into account. So let's say from here, there's not much to learn from this legal language. Not a detailed level. It is a more detailed level if we look at the items A to M in the part 2. But before we look into A to M, this is a place where the risk-based approach is established. Because, let me put my pointer. On the basis of the cybersecurity risk assessment, and where applicable, products with digital elements shall. So this means the typical must-have requirements in standards, also legal language, here refers to the condition of the cyber risk assessment. So only the cyber risk assessment can tell you what shall really means. And then it goes through several categories. And that is what we go through here to give you a idea, a high-level idea what that, what the width and depth of the Cyber Resilience Act actually is. So, looking at A, made available on the market without known exploitable vulnerabilities. So this is basically looking at CVEs and making sure that they are not exploitable in your product. So this is vulnerability management, especially for the products, and it applies to place on the market. And it applies to the risk assessment. So the vulnerabilities also need certain risk rating or can have a risk rating, and based on that risk, they need to be fixed or can be present in the product if that stays below the residual risk. Then we have the secure by default configuration. So that means if a product has different type of communication, for example, let's say there is a web server inside and it has HTTP and it has HTTPS, then by default HTTPS needs to be enabled. That's secure by default. HTTP can be downgraded from the security point of view, downgraded by the user later on. But the default should be the secure version. There is a limitation to this. If it is in a business relation and a tailor-made product, then there could be different agreements between the businesses. But as soon as this is a customer-facing or consumer-facing product, this is not a manufacturer and business user activity. Then the secure by default is, expected. And then we have security updates to address vulnerabilities. And these should be provided in an appropriate time frame. Automatic updates should be possible. And where possible, users need to get notification about the updates. Why is it? Okay. Access control is the next one. Unauthorized access is important to have, especially to protect confidential information, but also critical functionality. And then we have confidentiality requirement for information stored, transmitted, or otherwise processed, especially personal data is encrypted at rest or in transit. We also have integrity requirement of stored, transmitted, or processed data, including personal data, where these personal data should not be modified from unauthorized users. We have the processing of personal data limited to what is necessary. So that is data minimization needs to be in place. And protect the availability of essential basic functions is the next requirement to prevent the impact of denial of service attacks. So I like the example of a PV inverter. If there is a PV inverter and there is a denial of service attack from the network interface, still the electrical properties of that inverter should not be damaged. So in best case, it should stop communicating to the cloud, not delivering usage data or and so on, or production data, but should still do the inverting function of the DC-AC conversion. And another aspect of denial of service is that it itself should not damage and create attacks to other devices in the network. Attack surface minimization is also a very common and good practice. So external interfaces should be reduced to the minimum because attackers will always use the existing interfaces first. And then they will start to open and then fiddle around with the internal ones. But yes, external interfaces, what is easy to reach for the user is easy to reach for the attacker. So this needs to be limited, and there should not be any debug interfaces and so on, which makes it very easy for the attacker to do malicious activity, and which are not so very useful for users who would not typically use debug interfaces. And then we have exploitation mitigation mechanisms and techniques that products can have to detect and prevent exploitation. That is not for the common IoT product, but for network equipment, for example, or prevention systems, which all fall also under the CRA. This is a relevant technique and function to be available, to not propagate attacks through the network. The information recording, logging, audit logging functionality, and a monitoring of relevant internal activities is an important thing also for higher layer and higher level security to monitor and to allow forensics after an attack has happened. And then finally, we have the last item here, which is a privacy, but also a end of life requirement to easily remove all data and settings. So let's say I have a device in my smart home and it's connected to my Wi-Fi router. I typically provide the Wi-Fi credentials to that device so that it can connect to it. If I later on want to resell my smart home device because I buy a new one, the old one should go to somebody else, or I want to even dispose it, I want to make sure that nobody takes it and reads the Wi-Fi credentials and has access to my Wi-Fi. So to prevent this, it should be easy for me as a user to remove my settings and my personal data. Maybe the device also stores some sensitive user data, so all that should be removed. A factory reset can be a very effective way to do this. But on the other side, it also needs to make sure that it cannot be reverted, or it captures all data. And it's not just ignoring it, or there's still some data left. So this is the width and broadness of the technical requirements towards products. And by looking at it, I think we can already see and imagine that certain aspects do not apply to all kind of products. Exploitation mitigation, exploitation detection, yes, that is nothing that all products need to have. It depends on the risk analysis to say, okay, this is a risk where we need this product, this in the product, or where it is even not necessary because the product is not exposed to such a risk level. And then finally, looking at the last part, the vulnerability handling requirement. So what is the aspect of this? First of all, manufacturers need to identify and document vulnerabilities and components in the product and drop a software bill of material. So identifying and documenting vulnerabilities is one important aspect and activity here. And creating software bill of material is another important activity and requirement here. Here it says at the very least, the top level dependencies. So in software bill of material, you always talk about how deep into the dependencies do you go. Here it says at least the top level dependencies need to be documented. And then again, in relation to the risk, the vulnerabilities need to be addressed and remediated without delay, and security updates need to be provided. And where technically feasible, those security updates need to be provided separately from function updates, because typically function updates may have a stronger impact on the availability of devices. So in OT, for example, if there's functional updates, this would maybe prevent updating. On the other side, functional updates typically come with a cost, and it's the idea that security updates are free of charge, are provided free of charge without cost to avoid delay and make them available to all users immediately and as quickly as possible. This one is an interesting one. Apply effective and regular tests and reviews of the security of the product with digital elements. This points very strongly to a continuous testing process. Some already also read this as a need to at least sometimes do a penetration testing. And I kind of agree with this. Regular tests to identify vulnerabilities, that is what a penetration testing is targeted for, destined for. And then updates need to be available. And then there's a lot of things of how these updates need to be available and how manufacturers need to inform about these updates and how they need to disclose the vulnerabilities. That is an important topic as well here, that the vulnerability disclosure needs to happen in a responsible and controlled way, and a balance between telling the users about potential risks and not telling attackers how to attack devices. That is a critical element here. I have one more for the Annex 1, the risk, the vulnerability handling. It's put into place and enforce a policy on coordinated vulnerability disclosure. As I said, this is a necessary step. Take measures to facilitate the sharing of information with not only the users, but also upstream and downstream in the supply chain. The secure distribution of updates is a relevant item to look into, and keep updates available during the support period is another element and relevant element here. So far about the vulnerability handling and the requirements as they are defined in the Annex 1 of the standard. Let me finish this section with a little quiz. So think about what is an Cyber Resilience Act Annex 1? What can you find there? Does it provide the answer to the question, what do I need to do for the Cyber Resilience Act? Does it provide requirements for the secure development lifecycle, for the product and vulnerability handling? Or does it provide all of the above? feel free to put your responses into the chat. And then shortly I will resolve and give the answer. So from my point of view, it's C, all of the above. It clearly has the elements of B. They are covered in the part 1 and part 2. The answer, what do I need to do for Cyber Resilience Act, is partly answered in Annex 1. On top of that, you need to take the risk analysis into account. Having a look at the second question, what is the basis for the Cyber Resilience Act? The don't care principle, the not my fault excuse, or the risk-based approach? Yeah, I think this is quite straightforward. For sure, it's a risk-based approach. And then the last question, which is a quite open question for you to think about. If you like, you can put it into the chat. Is what requirements create the biggest headache for you? Where do you see the biggest gap to close for your company or for your product? And that leads to a activity that I'm doing currently a lot with our customers, is the gap analysis, to understand what is the current situation and how to move forward and how to understand where to address first. And from that gap analysis, develop a roadmap towards Cyber Resilience Act compliance. Thank you very much for your attention. We are a little bit over time. A lot of topics and content. Sorry for taking a little bit more than your time. Pablo, do we have some questions?
Okay, Michael, let me just double check. There was yeah, there was a couple of questions more based on placement and which standards apply. So there was a question about industrial computers, hardware and OS operating system, which category they would belong. There is also, wait, there was another question. Maybe you want to start with that one. And then there was
with
another.
The categories, yes, I can come back to that category question. One important aspect for the categorization is to look at the core functionality of the device. There's a lot of categories. So operating system is one category, browser, network interface, and so on. There's a lot of firewall, but that doesn't mean that everything which has an operating system falls into that category. That means only the operating itself as a digital product falls into that category. A product which uses an operating system does not necessarily fall into that category. It needs to take into account the core functionality. And then from my experience, if you define the core functionality, it's quite straightforward to identify in which category you fall.
All right, great. I think also on that note, just gonna do a little bit of our own promotion. On the CRACoWi website, we have a tool called Scope Check, which helps. It helps with the initial placement to figure out if you're in, if the CRA actually applies to you, and under which of the high-level categories do you fall into. So it helps you place yourself between the default category, class 1, class 2, and the critical categories. You can find that on. I'll place a link in the chat as well, but it's a free tool. No data is saved. Allows you to, figure out what your responsibilities are for that part of the project, and kind of as a first step before lots of the things that Michael was addressing today. All right. Yeah, I think that covers the questions that we had in the chat for now. I think with this, I would like to thank everyone for joining. We had a good participation, some good questions. I answered some of the questions directly in the chat. I want to remind you that we have our next webinar in the series happening on the 14th of April in the same time slot from 11 to 12 CT. She's probably going to be CST now that I remember, because time changes will, I think, happens this weekend. But yeah, and this this is, and we will have Michael again covering the last aspects of this. Thank you much for your time, and we will wait for you next time. Michael, thank you very
Looking
much.
forward to see you then. Thank you.
All right, bye everyone. Oh, and we're also in the InCyber Forum event in France next week. If anybody wants to swing by and get to meet part of the team, please feel free to find our booth.